Good morning. Welcome to our spiritual service, and today I'm going to be talking about Platform 8, Becoming Not Knowing. For those of you who don't know, these spiritual services this year have been devoted to the Living with Reality book, and they are part of Consciousness Boot Camp and Consciousness Boot Camp Lite, so they're available to anyone. Usually I give 2 talks on any platform. The first Sunday of the month is the first one, and the second one comes up when we record CBC. But one never knows what God has in mind, because we are on the path of not knowing, as our platform suggests, which is that we are becoming not knowing. This is a point in the book where we're shifting one more time into a new level. The first 4 platforms of the book are about partnering with others, about shifting the way we see ourselves in the world, beginning with becoming oneness and differentiated and co-creative and mutually supportive. And of course, this is crucial because we all talk about unity consciousness. I shouldn't say we all. We get so used to being in a collective of people who think about the shift in consciousness. Well, those people who think about that talk about or think about unity consciousness. And most religions carry some element of that concept that we are all one under God. Unfortunately, then we become the only ones under God. Sometimes we start splitting. But this is not an unusual idea. But in Living with Reality and in our programs, as well as in our world, we are trying to start living from the paradigm of oneness, and that's what our whole program is based on, is oneness consciousness. And then we moved in the second part of the book, which was about shifting our relationship with ourselves. And that I always thought was interesting, because people want to know, why do you shift your relationship with others before you shift your relationship with yourself? Well, of course it all happens simultaneously, but it's because we have to really get that we are one before we can actually start shifting our relationship with ourselves, because who are the selves that we're shifting our relationship to? And in the section on partnering with ourselves, we entered into the process of becoming self-aware, integrated, and accountable. And for those of you who have been part of this, we have just finished becoming accountable. And I don't mean we have finished becoming accountable, but we have finished the platform of discussing the platform, where we started to deal with amends, accountability, and dealing with the dark side. And because negative energy takes us over, and then we really are out of control of our behavior, and we are not accountable. So in the process of going through all these platforms, we've had to deal with a lot of shame, because we've been looking at our behavior with ruthless self-honesty and self-awareness. We've been trying, and it brings up a lot of negative judgments we have towards ourselves. And that seems to be inevitable at this stage in our collective history, because people have been brought up with shame, shamed by our parents, embarrassed. Shame has been used as a form of social control. And so those people who are trying to raise children in different ways, and parents, you guys have a preschool, trying to raise children in a nurturing environment, to teach without shame is very challenging. Especially when we're the 24-hour-a-day custodians of children who get on our nerves. And it's hard to avoid shaming, because that's the way we've learned how to control one another's behavior. Oh, look at what you've done to me. Look what you're doing to me. Oh my God. And so we've had to deal with a lot of shame. And we've been hopefully shifting shame into consciousness. And that has been the theme of everything that we have been doing up to this point. How do we shift all these things that appear to be negative into consciousness itself? How does the ego, which we discuss a lot in the book, how does that shift into consciousness? Well, the ego is the awareness of individual existence, and it's necessary. And it's, our favorite examples are, it's cold in the room, would you put a sweater on? That's what your ego is there for. But the ego is not there to tell you how to live your life. And it's not there to tell everyone else how to live their lives. The ego is an aspect of our consciousness, and it is not the highest level of our consciousness, but it is a necessary part of our consciousness. And it was born when we were born, and it has a very infantile consciousness because it goes, wow, 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 look at me, I need. And so there we have it. So the ego is kind of infantile, and it's like giving a child the A-bomb. You know, the ego has run the planet to a great extent, and it has a very infantile consciousness. And so what we've been trying to do is help the ego to evolve and find that it too can be part of consciousness. For example, the ego will tell you you need a sweater, or the ego will tell you that there's a train coming down the road, or the ego tells you it's time to get up, set the alarm. There's things like that that the ego can do because it says I exist as an individual as well as an aspect of the oneness. But the ego can also tell us to ask for divine consciousness. The ego can say, wow, I don't know how to handle this. I'm in trouble. But does it? Typically not. Now, I'm going to come back to this because this, of course, directly leads into the next platform, which is becoming not knowing. But just to summarize how everything is now beginning to lead towards consciousness, inexorably, inevitably. We have the dark side, which is the constellation of negative energies that I go into great detail in Platform 7. And we've made the talk, the extra talk on the 7 Dirty Secrets of the Dark Side are available on YouTube as well, aren't they now? Yeah. Okay, so if anybody is not in CBC, they still can watch that video, even though it's a CBC video, because we put it on YouTube, because we want people to get it, the 7 Dirty Secrets of the Dark Side. And that the dark side itself has a purpose in the universe, as negative emotions can help us see where we're weak and how vulnerable we are and why we're vulnerable to negative thinking and feeling. And that becomes an agent of consciousness. It's helping the dark side makes us more conscious. If we see ourselves reaching for a cigarette when we know that it's killing us, then it becomes a way of communicating to us, there's something wrong, there's something in me that's distressed, there is something that's not quite right. And so that, even that, can show us that there is, it's information which can be part of our consciousness if we use it that way, instead of just saying, oh, I had a cigarette and I think I'll have another one. So everything that comes from the dark side, from the negative energy, can be used to support our consciousness if we know how to use it. And the 7 Dirty Secrets of the Dark Side go into that. Now, this section of the book is after we have dealt with shifting our relationship with others to partnership, to cooperation, to oneness, shifting our relationship to ourselves to partnership where we're looking honestly at ourselves. And I didn't explain that, but the shift in the relationship with ourselves is that we actually start to look at ourselves with thorough, fearless self-honesty, that we learn techniques for self-awareness, which are in the book and in the program, that we start to become integrated and not so dominated by our wants and our needs and being overwhelmed by a single aspect of us that says, oh, I've got to have this even though it's going to destroy my life. When we've become integrated, when we started to integrate the ego, when we start to become accountable, we've shifted our relationship with ourselves because we actually have begun to become the people that we like and respect. People often talk about unconditional love, and I want to talk about that just for a second. There is something to unconditional love, and that is an energy. That is an energy, a love energy that we can give to every being, including ourselves, at all times. But unconditional love has often been confused with unconditional acceptance of everything you do, and you're a good guy, and unconditional acceptance of whatever the ego is working its way through. And that is different, because the unconditional love that I'm talking about is like the sun that shines on everything. It doesn't matter what it is. You know, that sun, that divine love is always there. However, when we're acting in ways that are harmful to ourselves and others, we need to be aware of that. And even shame, and that's what I was saying before, can have a function if it's just a moment and we say, wow, I did that, something. I feel ashamed of myself. Not to go into some toxic place with it, but it's like, ouch, something is wrong. Gee, I wonder if that was the wrong thing. And a truly loving self will say, I fell off the wagon, I did it again, I'm not going to beat myself up for it, but what can I do differently now? Can I get support? I'm trying to find a way to break through that behavior. And in becoming accountable, we not only learn to make amends, but we also started to get more command over ourselves because we began to understand our negativity more and began to re-regulate the flow of our own energy, of not feeling so compelled by the negativity that overwhelms us. And it's a very important platform, and I really suggest if you haven't watched that video to watch it, and please read the book, and it's free online. So even shame can turn to consciousness, can't it? If we use it correctly. And then we become true friends to ourselves, because we are no longer rationalizing our behavior, but we're trying to help support ourselves to the next level of consciousness. And that is true friendship to ourselves, true partnership with ourselves. The willingness to be self-aware is a gift that we give to ourselves. Because then we can start doing something about the behaviors that are causing so much damage to ourselves and others. And then we begin to genuinely like ourselves. Not just because the sun is shining on everything, but we actually do things that we respect. When you finish making an amend, for example, no matter how the other person has reacted to it, you can feel good that you have done the right thing. You are adding a deposit to the bank of self-love. When we confront our demons, even if we do it ungracefully and with difficulty, we can add another deposit to that bank of self-love. Years ago, the expression came to me, if you want to respect yourself, do something you respect. You see the bully coming in and say, I need respect. No, give me respect. Well, you're molesting children and beating up women and stabbing men in the middle of the evening. You want me to respect this? It's that behavior. I cannot respect the behavior, and because you've been taken over by negative energy and the ego, and I cannot respect that. It is often the ego that walks around saying, I need respect. Well, we can only respect the ego when it's doing its job well. And at the end of Platform 7, we had a wonderful healing arts theater production where we realized that the ego has been given too much of a burden to take care of us and carry the world for us. And it really can't do a good job of it. And it's really a 2-year-old with an atom bomb, and it feels very inadequate. And that we need to find another way of guiding ourselves through life other than what our egos tell us. And this brings us to becoming not knowing. Becoming not knowing is one of only 2 platforms in the 3rd section of Living with Reality, which is relaxing into the process of living, changing our relationship with the process of living. And it isn't just changing our relationship with life, it's changing our relationship with the process of living. It's how it is to live. And how to be in a world that is very tough. We are, each of us, so incredibly fragile. each of us, so scared, easily feeling alone, whether we were living in cave society where there was constant danger, or we're living in our current world where there is constant danger, the fear of becoming disabled if you aren't already, the fear of losing what you have, the fear of not ever being able to get what you need, the fear of not being loved, the fear of losing your job, losing your money. The stock market will go down if you have stocks. The fear of old age, the fear that some other woman is going to take your man. It's the fear that you're going to be humiliated, embarrassed, the fear. Some of these fears are made up, but some of them are real. Life is a struggle. One of the first lines in Living with Reality is life is a struggle, whether you're an insect or a bird, life is a struggle for everyone. Everything that is alive has to struggle for survival. And our egos are all about survival, because that's the level of consciousness they represent. So in that situation, it's very natural that we're going to be looking for something to guide us through this jungle. And what we look to is either our bodies, if we're in a very physical environment, it's like, I'm going to hack my way through the jungle, or in more and more in the kind of society that most of us live in, our minds. We're going to figure out how we're going to retire at the age of 62. We are 7 years old, and we've already got a retirement plan that our parents have started for us with grandma's money, or you know what I'm saying. Everybody is trying to maneuver and manipulate themselves through the world, and we're trying to do it with our minds. And we don't even realize that there's another way. Now, our minds are connected to our egos because that's what we learn. So the ego creates the agenda, and then the mind tries to fulfill it. How am I going to get respect so that I can feel good about myself? Well, I know how I'm going to do that. Well, in one family, I'm going to get straight A's. In another family, I'm going to play the trumpet. In the third family, I'm going to, do well in business. In the fourth, I'm going to be the most popular kid. In the fifth, I'm going to be, all of us are figuring out these strategies, how we're going to get respect. And we use our minds, we try to manipulate ourselves, but the agenda is actually determined by the ego. And most of us don't realize that. So many people have been taught that it is conscious, that it is an aspect of consciousness to focus on goals. Set your goal and go after it. This is part of the creating our own reality syndrome. Now, I'm not saying that goals are in and of themselves bad things. But goals are only useful in a context. It's when the goal becomes something and then we become attached to it, it becomes a problem. Now, why do I say that? Let's say that you have a goal to finish your homework by the end of the day. And that's a good goal, because you've got to go to school the next day. All right, that makes sense. All right, is anybody going to complain about that? Well, supposing you have 104 fever. You may have to drop that goal. Now, that sounds silly, right? Because you'll say, well, of course, if you have 104 fever, you're going to drop the goal. Really? Now, take a look at ourselves and get honest about it. How many times have we been driven by our goals to the point to the goal. And why are we attached to that goal? Probably the ego is in there somewhere, like, oh, if I don't do this, then I'm not going to please Mrs. Hennessy. And I have to please Mrs. Hennessy because I need somebody to love me. Or I have to finish my homework because I won't get an A and then my father will be angry. Or whatever it is that's behind all of this, that we're driven by some need that we haven't even identified. Is there any relaxation in that? I have to make this business work. I have to make this marriage work. So I started with something small or obvious, like, okay, you have 104 fever, you don't do your science project. Well, that can be a crisis for a 13-year-old. But what about us? We have so much more sophisticated goals. I'm going to make this marriage work because I'm going to prove that I am a better woman than my mother who couldn't make her marriage work. Way, way more enlightened, right? I am not going to admit that I am mentally ill because I don't want to admit that I'm like my dad. I'm going to make this business work because that's the only way to prove that I am not a fuck-up. And people say, yeah, do it, cheer you on. Where did those agendas come from? Who said? Where is it written? I must be married by the time I'm 32. I have to have children of my own. And they have to have my genes. Even if it costs $200,000 and I become a nutcase for 2 years because I'm taking drugs, I have to have this. I've got to get through medical school and prove myself, even though I can't stand the sight of blood. I've got to have that promotion at work because even though I'm totally incompetent at doing that job, aren't these familiar? Of course we don't do this, but we've noticed this in other people. They get stuck on agendas. How does this happen? Even I've got to get well. I've got to get well. I've got to overcome my illness. Every one of these becomes an agenda. And every time we have an agenda, we are stuck in some idea that we have become attached to because we have some belief that this is what we need and this will solve our problems. Or if we don't have it, it will create problems. And we really don't care what havoc we cause to ourselves or others. I'm inspired to do the most magnificent painting in the world. The fact that my 3 children are hungry should have no impact on me. I used to think that was really cool. Now I think that's insane. Now, that's only one aspect of knowing, because this is what we're talking about, that we think we know. We know what we need, we know how to get there, we know how the world works, and we become attached. Now I'd like to speak directly to the issue of knowing, of having already introduced the topic of agendas, which you'll see is part of it. But I want to get back to the beginning, which is, why do we feel like we have to know? Why do we have to know the answer? Why do we have to have the solution all the time to everything, not only for ourselves, but particularly for those around us? Have you ever heard yourself saying, you know, he should... You don't even notice it. It seems so... He should take his medicine. He should study more. She should leave that guy. How do we know? How do we really know? Why do we have to know? Why do we have to pretend we know? And these are two separate questions. And this is all I go into in some logical detail in the book. Why is it that we need to know? Do we really need to know? Do we need to look like we need to know? Do we want people to be impressed by us by thinking that we know? Do we have some ego attachment that people are only going to respect us because we know? I mean, how did the people look in our families, in our society, who look like they know? Are they the ones who have the power? Oh yeah, mother always knew what to do. She was the one who had the power. She was the one who had the respect. I want to be mom, so I have to know everything. That was our family. What about yours? And then we elect politicians who have to go out and pretend that they know. Because you're not going to vote for somebody who says, I don't know. You know what's really amusing about this? We happen to be in the United States in this year that I'm making this video. We're going into yet another presidential election year. And whoever is the party that's out of power will then blame the party that's in power for things that they have no control over, right? And they'll say, well, this is Obama's economic crisis. Right, it belongs to President Obama. It has nothing to do with anything else that has happened in the last 10 years. It's President Obama, and we have a better idea about how to solve this. Now, you know, on some level, they're quaking in their boots. They have no idea how to solve the economic crisis. You know, their policies help bring in the economic crisis, but they have to say that they're different from the other guy who wasn't able to solve the economic crisis. And so here they are, and they're saying that, and they have to convince themselves that they know. Because how are they going to go out there and get us to vote for them if they can't believe themselves that they have the answer? And this is what we foster. We in the collective foster this because we want them to know. Because somehow or other, as those of you who remember 1950s US TV, father must know best. Mm-hmm. There's got to be somebody with an answer. So isn't this interesting? We flip-flop now. 1 minute we have to know, and we're busy telling everybody what they should do. And at the other hand, we really know we don't know, so we want somebody else to know. Well, why? Because, as I said, life is a struggle. It's a scary world. If nobody knows, then what? I mean, the world would come to an end, right? If we all admitted that we didn't know. So, the first thing about becoming not knowing is to admit that not only do we need to walk the path of not knowing, we need to admit already that we already don't know. I don't know what to do. Do you? We can have beliefs. Okay, now, we confuse beliefs with knowing. Now, in science, at least they have the decency to talk about these things as hypotheses and theories. Of course, people become ego attached to them too. If you have been teaching the theory of blip for the last 40 years and you're a college professor teaching the theory of blip, do you really want some other theory to come out and supplant you and say the theory of blip is just passé? Now it's the theory of blop? I mean, you've built your entire career, your income, your value in society is based on the theory of blip. And then if you're in the medical profession, you open a franchise of clinics that are using therapy. And then somebody comes along and says blip therapy doesn't work. Now blop therapy does work, and it's twice as fast. And you have $4 million invested in plant and equipment in blip therapy. Well, they're wrong. Obviously they have to be wrong, unless you can retool really fast and become the head blopper. But, you know, that's things, you know, and then we suddenly find ourselves obsolete, and then we hope that we had started our retirement fund at the age of 7. I mean, these things have practical consequences in the real world. You know, how much do we really want innovation if the innovation is going to get in the way of our comfort? So can you see all the attachments that we're having to these beliefs, these truths, these theories, these hypotheses, these knowings, all the versions of knowing? And then we have another problem, which is supposing people think that we should have known and then they find out that we didn't. You mean you didn't know that? You should have known. You should have known. You should have known. Okay, mom and dad have the teenage son who's starting to do drugs. Well, who are we going to blame that one on? Mom or dad? Or are we going to blame it on stepmom or stepdad? Or grandpa? Or the neighborhood? Well, you should have known he was taking drugs when blah, 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 blah. You should have known that if you continued yelling at him every day that he was going to commit suicide. So now we're adding, right? We've got the I should know, but I don't know, but I have to pretend that I know. I want you to know, to you should have known, because if you didn't and you didn't do good, you're at fault. Well, what are you going to do? You can take on the role of the all-powerful knower, hoping that nobody ever finds out you don't know anything, or you can take the role of the I'm innocent, blameless, and it's all your responsibility. You know, I'm only the child's stepmother. You're his father. You're the one who, and you should have known. So we bandy that about too. And then we're tested. We're always tested as to what we know. And this is the thing that always got me about tests, is that the teacher decides what is the most important information and then asks you. And if you didn't have the right answer, you just didn't know, and you didn't get a good grade. Now, I have a mind which is very good at synthetic thinking, but very poor at retaining information. And so I studied history in high school, like everybody else, and I could not remember what year anything happened, the name of any king. That's the way they used to teach history. God help us, I think it's different. Still like that? Is where I couldn't remember anything. I couldn't even remember what century things happened in. I always had a theory about why things happened, but I never knew when they happened. I don't remember in my own life about, people will say, now let me see, that year, I'm always trying to remember. And that was so I didn't know. What I knew had no value. Wow. Versus what I didn't know, which, in fact, I did very poorly in history. Ironically, when I went to college and graduate school, I studied history. Because then, they didn't ask you what the date was, they asked you why. And suddenly I knew. Now, did I get smarter? It's just that I was being tested for something. So I've just given a few samples of the craziness around knowing. I think about the 13-year-olds who look to one another, to know something. And there'll be the popular kid who, just because he's looking is seen as somehow the leader of the pack and is supposed to know something about how to be a man in society, as opposed to learning that from the parents that don't know either. So, and how much we extort respect for our knowing when we really don't anyway know anything. And how many of our children have noticed that we don't seem to know much. Yeah, and then they try to prove we don't know, which means that we really have to extort respect from them. But there's an awful lot of energy put into knowing, isn't there? Now I'd like to talk a little bit about beliefs right now, because we often confuse knowing with beliefs. And I started talking about that when I was talking about the guy with the blip theory or the blop theory. All we can truly say is that I believe that this is true. Now, I may not even believe it, but I may be just spouting it. Yeah. For example, let's say I'm a leader in some course that I'm teaching, and my whole ego agenda of my value in society is contingent upon me being a leader in that course, and I'm going to teach it whether I believe it or not. And I won't even let myself know that I don't believe it. I mean, I have seen people who have a belief that something is going to work, and it doesn't work year after year after year after year after year, and it doesn't stop them from teaching it because they're making money teaching it. You've seen it? I know you've seen it. They don't even want to acknowledge to themselves that they don't believe it. The minister who has to stand up there and say God is good and loving and all of that, and his wife has suddenly gotten liver cancer, and right now that isn't what he feels. But he still has to say it because that's his job. Of course there are ministers who will stand up there and say, right now it's hard for me to believe this. This is what I've been told. I want to believe it. And there is the I want to believe, because this belief is going to rescue me. If it's really true, if I focus on this goal, I will automatically be able to achieve it. If I visualize McDonald's on the horizon, it will appear. 30 years later, you're still sitting there in the Sahara Desert wondering where that McDonald's is. Or worse, there is a McDonald's. But you see what I'm saying? That these erroneous beliefs lead to shame and confusion, but we can't give up a belief. I mean, it's the truth, isn't it? And then we'll try to ask ourselves, well, I didn't visualize properly. I wasn't sufficiently visualizing. And rather than saying, maybe this is a partial truth, just a partial truth, and maybe there's more to it than that. It's very hard for us to get off a belief. Beliefs are just beliefs. Now, I want to say that goals and beliefs can be useful, but they should not be confused with truth. That's all I'm saying. For instance, you can say, is the sun going to rise tomorrow morning? And you'll say, sure it will. But all you can really say is, I believe the sun will rise tomorrow. Well, as we now know, the sun doesn't rise anyway. It's the earth that moves, not the sun. But we all think, we all think, when we're not thinking, that the sun is rising. That isn't damaging anything to believe that the sun is rising, because as a matter of practical value, the sun might as well be rising. But if, on the other hand, we want to travel and we still think that the world is flat, we're going to be scared to go beyond a certain point because we're going to fall off, right? The fact that it appears that the earth is flat, then, and we believe that the earth is flat, becomes a practical problem when we're trying to figure out how to get somewhere. So you see, a belief can be handy. It just should not be considered the truth, because the truth is very complex, and as God once told me, the truth is changing, which is really aggravating. The way that we measure here cannot be the same way we measure in outer space. I mean, we have different universes in which we operate. Something that may seem to be true on the material plane is not necessarily true on the spiritual plane. We have to be flexible. We have to be open. We have to be realizing that these are tools that we have, that they're useful or they're not useful. The example that came to me about beliefs and their usefulness is, if I did not believe that the sidewalk would still be there when I got up the next day, I wouldn't know whether to put on shoes or hiking boots. But because every other day I've gotten up, there is a sidewalk outside the door, I figure I can put on regular shoes. I don't need to wear hiking boots because I'm assuming that in fact there's still going to be a sidewalk. Now there may not be a sidewalk when I get up the next morning, but the belief that there's a sidewalk gives me allows me to put on shoes every day. The likelihood is that the sidewalk will still be there. However, there could have been an earthquake and there's no sidewalk anymore. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a situation like that where there's an earthquake and there's something that isn't there, that you believe is there and isn't there. But the belief, that's all it is, gives you a way of coping on a daily basis. I believe that the I-15 freeway goes to Temecula because it did yesterday. So if I'm making a plan for the day, I don't have to call around to find out if the I-15 freeway is still there. That would waste an inordinate amount of time. I believe that the school will still be there, and so when I get up in the morning, I don't have to waste time calling around to find out if there's still a school. You know, and it's so different when there is some kind of catastrophe, like it snows, and I don't know if the school is open that day. So I do have to call around to find out whether or not school is open, or I listen to my radio if the radio is playing. Say, oh, because anything that's disruption of the routine makes us question everything we think we know. The way we run our lives, the way we run our economy. We have been doing this forever. Let's say we've gone through 4 or 5 years of a housing boom where everybody knows that real estate rises in price. Everybody knows that. That's the truth, right? And then it didn't. And we're all appalled. The nerve of reality getting in the way of our beliefs. I invested in real estate. That's my future. That's my nest egg. That's my retirement. Who's at fault? Who can I blame for this? Obama. That's right. You know, Dad said, if you work hard, you'll get ahead. And suddenly, your entire industry has been outsourced to India. And it doesn't matter how hard you worked. The nerve! The nerve! What happened to truth? Truth changes. Reality changes. The planet changes. The climate changes. But I bought property here because there were these beautiful trees, and then there's a damn fire. And now I have a piece of parched earth and a very overpriced house. I expect everything to stay the same, because then I know what to do. I can't live in the not knowing. I have to know, and so everything has to stay the same. You were healthy when we met. What happened to you? How dare you? We can't grasp reality. It flows like the stream. But we want it to stay fixed so we can develop beliefs which we consider to be truths, so we know what to do so we can be safe. That is antithetical to relaxing into the process of living, because living is a process that continually shifts and changes, and every moment there is yet one more challenge that I'm not prepared for. I was prepared. I went to medical school in 1920. I know what to do. We have diseases that didn't even exist in 1920. And we always think if we could just get past this moment and deal with one of these unknowns, that we can relax. Am I going to get the loan for this house? I'm trying to refinance the house. As soon as I get the loan, I can relax, because there won't be another thing that comes up, and another thing, and another thing, and another thing. Is my article going to be printed in such and such? Because when that does, then I can relax. How? Well, why is that going to make me relax? What's the next thing that I'm not going to know? And the things that we tend to get all stressed out about. Am I going to get this contract? Am I going to get this job? Am I going to get this house? How much money am I going to be making this year? Okay, okay. Once I know, then I can relax. Oh, then you get to the job and you find out there's somebody after you, or you're on probation, or the company is insolvent. You just got the damn job and the company is closing. And we have some fantasy that there was another time when life wasn't like this. It's called the good old days. Do you remember that? I have yet to have a day that the next day I think was the good old days. People talk about the 1950s as the good old days. I don't know what they're talking about. I didn't think they were good. I was a woman. The good old days were not good for women, as far as I'm concerned. They weren't good for blacks. They weren't good for Hispanics. They weren't good for a lot of people.
They were good for the good old boys.
For the good old boys. But it wasn't even, because then the good old boys needed to know everything. Do you remember, if you look at the videos of the Congress, you see Dwight Eisenhower and all the politicians, they're all white men in suits wearing neckties. I don't know what could be good about any day that a man has to wear a necktie. Walking around acting like they know something. Right, making the world safe for democracy. Having to fight the yellow peril as it was coming from China, or Korea, or God knows what. Or those damned women, or those damn blacks who are coming in to take over. While these same men are beating their children because they were beaten. Those were the days, my friend. When polio was the scourge of the planet. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. Life is always full of stress, and we are always making stuff up to give ourselves the feeling that we know something about something so we can have some control over something. And now here comes this mad woman who comes up with this thing called the path of not knowing that I didn't even write because it came from a higher consciousness. Now this is the good news. Are you ready? Are you waiting? Do you want to hear the good news?
Yes.
Even God doesn't know.
You mean God only knows us well?
That's right. That was the phrase that came to me years ago. Only God knows, and even she doesn't know. Well, why? Because God is evolving, because reality is evolving, because truth is evolving. That's what God told me. Even the truth is changing. God is changing. The truth is changing. Everything is changing. Oh no! Stop the world! I want to get off. Okay, so have a goal.
Too late.
Have a goal. So here it is. My goal is I'm going to get to the bathroom before I pee in my pants. Okay, that's my goal. Now, what is the purpose of that goal? The purpose of that goal is to get me moving towards the bathroom. That's a good thing, but supposing I'm so in a hurry to get to the bathroom so I don't pee in my pants that I trip over the shoes that I left last night in the pathway and I fall on my face, and then not only do I pee in my pants, but I break my neck. And I think, you know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking, boy, oh boy, oh boy. It wouldn't have been so bad to pee in my pants after all. You know what I'm saying? These things that seem so important to us in the moment, like, I've got this goal, I've got to do this, I've got to, can look ridiculous. Let's say you finally get the business stable, and then you discover that you have an inoperable brain tumor. What happened to that goal of getting your business stable? It like, who cares? Or I'm so anxious to get that contract, to make the money, to pay the mortgage, that I don't get enough sleep, and I drive too fast, and I end up in the hospital. And the rest of my life on a feeding tube. You know, it's all relative, isn't it? We begin to realize that, okay, goals can get us going, but we can't become attached. Because life is not like that. And we have to be always willing to deal with the process of living. How are we going to do that? Could you pass me the book? I hope it's in the table of contents, because I have a belief that it's in the table of contents.
And if it's not, you should have known.
I should have known that this today I was going to need this. That is right. I want to say something else. Looking at the table of contents, see, here's a perfect example. I am looking at the table of contents because my goal is to find the path of not knowing. But in the process of looking at the table of contents, I looked down and realized, oh, I didn't talk about life purposes. Oh, I think I better do that. You see what I mean? I'm going to let go of the goal. The goal got me to take the next step. God tells me, go look at this, and here it is. I want to say one more thing about life purposes. We get into these really powerful life purpose agendas. People will often come to me and say, I have not found my life's purpose yet. Well, all of us have life purposes, and they're all unconscious. Our life purpose is to prove my mother wrong. My life purpose is to prove God wrong. My life purpose is to prove that my ego really knows what it's doing. And so on and so on. And these are the life purposes, these are the agendas that are running us. I talk about all of this in much more detail in this book. But I want you to get that. we have unconscious life's purposes that are running us. In the book, I give you directions on how to release agendas, how to release life purposes, how to identify what they are and how to release them so we're not being driven. That, maybe I'll talk about that in the next talk also. But I just want you to know that all of that is in the book, and please read it, because it really helps us to start unmasking ourselves and realizing what it is that's really running us. And then on top of that, we want to have a noble sounding life purpose, like, providing for my children, saving the world, whatever it is that I think my life's purpose is. And whatever that life purpose is becomes the agenda that runs my life. Proving that I am sane when I'm not. That can be a life purpose that can run you ragged. It's not useful. What God told me is beliefs are only beliefs. If they're useful, keep them. If they become useless, throw them away. Everything in Living with Reality, this book, may be burned someday because it's no longer useful. Either because the world has changed, human consciousness has changed, and it doesn't describe anything anymore. Get rid of it. Or you can have it as a relic. It's like, oh yeah, back in 2012, this book was relevant. My God, barbarians. People must have been really pathetic. This had anything to do with the way it was. I don't care. We should not make anything sacred except for the living consciousness, the living higher consciousness. So I need to speak for a moment about higher consciousness. See, all of this happened on my way to looking for the path of not knowing. Because I said, oh, it says right here, I talk about what is higher consciousness. Higher consciousness, I describe it in two forms, which I've mentioned before. One is cognitive. You have a higher perspective. You're looking from above and you're looking down and you're seeing how ridiculous we are. And you're watching all the dynamics and you're not so caught up in the self, in that little ego perspective of, well, my truth is. It's like, who cares about what your truth is? I want to see what's really going on. Okay, so that's one level of higher consciousness, is looking from the larger perspective, and we are always trying to do that. But the other thing is, okay, well, I'll give you an example. Let's say the two of us are arguing about which is the right necktie to wear. Is this necktie better or is that necktie? I think this necktie is much better. It's more hip. It's more 2012. Well, this necktie is better because it's got a classic look. And then if you're looking from higher consciousness, you look down and say, what do you need a necktie for? That's what I'm talking about. As a higher perspective where you're actually questioning why you're doing anything rather than arguing about the way to do it. Or noticing dynamics and so on. But the other aspect of higher consciousness is energetic. It is the divine consciousness. It is the pure energy itself of divine consciousness. That vibrational energy that manifests through the mind, through the body, through the emotions, through the lamp. Everything is vibrational, and it takes form according to the density of that vibration. That's the best I can explain it. And I say that not because I read it in a book, because I never believe anything that I read, except my own, of course. But because I've experienced it. Now I know that even my experience is limited because I am having limited experience and I'm having my own perception of that experience, which is we talk about at the beginning of the book. But I can tell you, for those of you who have not experienced yourselves as a vibrational energy yet, doesn't mean you never will, and that is an experience that I have had. And so when I've read about people who deal with that, I thought, but now that I have it, I say, yeah, I get it. I get it now. Anyway, just very, very briefly, understanding that higher consciousness is actually energetic. We call it energy. It's not even energy. There's no word for it that I had. Some people use subtle energies. I'm beginning to like that word because it separates it from the electricity that when you stick the light bulb in. But it's these energies that are coming from a higher dimension, whatever the heck that means. But I know it's there because I've been there. When you really feel like your head is lifted off your body and you're looking around and everything looks ridiculous. And you see how ridiculous we all are, and you can just laugh at everything. And you just feel so filled with this incredible energy. And you know that it's there. And you say, I want that. So being in higher consciousness not only means perspective, it also means the ability to connect to that energy. And something quite amazing can happen when you have the connection to that other dimension. You begin to get information. You begin to get wisdom. You begin to get answers. Now, I thought you just spent all this time talking about not knowing and what's this? Well, this is the path of not knowing, is that we clear ourselves of our agendas, no matter how noble they look. And we become blank. And we become truly inspired. Now, how do we know when we're truly inspired and versus when our ego is speaking? We may need support. Oh yes, I went into a meditation and I was told that I really am Mother Mary. And that I'm deluded. 9 times out of 10, people are just deluded. Or we really, 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 really want something to be true, and we tell ourselves that we've gotten this from higher consciousness. The only way to truly be sure that you're in higher consciousness is to be completely without agendas, which means that the ego domination must have quieted down enough so that you can become blank. Now this is why not knowing doesn't come until platform 8. Because we have to have done some major work on overcoming the domination of ego to be able to get wisdom from higher consciousness. Otherwise, higher consciousness or God or inspiration are just one more tool of the ego, masquerading as something else. I was guided to take your husband. Well, maybe I was, but by what? And we have to be clear and not dominated by the dark side. If we're dominated by fear, can we be in higher consciousness? No. Or anger, or despair, or self-hatred. Everything becomes a fix for our feelings. And what we think is higher consciousness is yet one more effort to fix the way we feel. We have been practicing a technique called what is for the highest good of all. If you've been working with us since, at least since Platform 6. Is it for the highest good of all, including me, to do this? Is it to go to the Chinese restaurant for dinner? Is it for the highest good of all, including me, to wear these socks? Getting into the habit of asking higher consciousness, why are we doing this? First of all, we want to be guided by higher consciousness because we know we don't know anything, but also because we're tuning ourselves. Tuning ourselves, till it becomes a habit to not listen to the ego, but to ask for divine guidance. We're trying to make that conscious choice to ask for divine guidance the unconscious choice, the one we do automatically. That we are training ourselves to not be dominated by our egos in moment by moment. When people say, but how do I know that I'm getting the right answer? Or, I did this and I thought God told me to bet on this horse and it lost. I said, well, maybe God wanted you to have the experience of losing so that you would stop betting on the horses. But more important than that, get into the habit. If your goal in asking for divine guidance is any agenda, you're not asking for divine guidance. If you've got an agenda of any sort, you are trying to manipulate the universe. So if you say, okay, God, what should I do to beat this cancer? You've got an agenda. Are you really asking for divine guidance? Or has your ego decided that you're supposed to survive the cancer and you're trying to figure out how to get there? Get in the habit, even though it's arduous, of asking for guidance on every little thing. And then when your life is at stake, you will be there. You will be in the habit. We are in the habit of listening to our egos 24/7. That's the way we've been trained. It's not our fault. And why do we want higher consciousness? Because it's smarter than we are. It's an intelligence greater than our own. Because we're wandering around acting like we know something, when we know we don't know. And we're making it up. And we're allowing wisdom to come to us and through us. And we're not going to let the ego hijack that. And we're going to allow that energy to come through us because it brings us peace. It brings us that calm and well-being, that we're no longer desperately looking for answers because there are no more questions. When I really feel connected to divine consciousness, and I think James has asked me sometimes, well, what do you want to ask while we're here? I don't want to ask anything. I have no question. I know it sounds odd, but in those moments, there are no questions. I'm just relaxed into the process of living. And I'm in allowance that God, I know that I will be guided somehow, step by step. Sometimes I will hear messages because I do. That's how I write. It's like, okay, say this, write this. But often how I'm guided is by walking into walls. You walk into enough walls and then suddenly you walk through an opening and you say, oh, I guess I'm supposed to go that way. I keep trying. I'll just like you. I make an effort to do the right thing. I ask for guidance. Then I go this way, then I go that way, and it looks like, and people look at me and say, my God, God is really jerking you around. First God tells you to do this, and then God tells you to, I don't care. What do I care? It's not about that. It's about following that divine guidance that brought me to realizing that I had forgotten to mention things that God wanted me to talk about. So the guidance that said, go look for, where's the path of not knowing reminded me that I didn't ask about what is higher consciousness. No agenda. So somebody was sitting here saying, but didn't you say you were going to talk about the path of not knowing? Aren't you supposed to talk about that? No, that's a human agenda. That was just a thought, a goal that got me moving in some direction. The true surrender is to allow my own beliefs, my own agendas, which I will have, to slip through my hands like sand and not hold on to any of them. Not hold on to the stream, that I go into the stream to bathe, not to take with me, that I go to higher consciousness to be in it, not to make my life easy. And from that place, amazing things start happening. That somehow or other, I find myself moving in directions that I could not have imagined. And that, of course, will ultimately bring us to platform 9, Becoming, and I love that platform. That's my favorite. However, in this moment, I have this great temptation to just leave you without getting to the path of not knowing, but I'm going to read it to you because I promised. No, because I asked for divine guidance. I am going to read it to you, but I'm not going to explain it, and we'll talk about that another time. But I want to just bring you into this place because I'd like you to end this with the feeling of not knowing. I don't want to finish this chapter with you feeling like you know something.
Good.
Do you see what I mean? I want you to feel the energy of not knowing, that space where you're just in some space. Can you feel it? Mm-hmm. Like your head is kind of like swimming. Let's not try to get out of that space. Let's be with it. Let's know that from that space all wisdom comes. Walking the path of not knowing. This book appears to be a series of beliefs and opinions, but it is in essence more a book of practices that either work or don't work in a certain context at a given time. Is this perspective on the world serving you? Is it serving the collective? That's all we need to know for this moment. In general, they seem to work, at least at this time in history. Remember our perspective. We don't know the truth. We have beliefs. If our beliefs are useful and working, we can continue to use them. When they are obsolete or no longer working, we let them go. And that's true of organizations that we belong to, beliefs just as well as belief systems that we've hung on to, relationships we're in. Let ourselves be moved through our lives without relying on structure to give us a false sense of safety. At this point, I would like to share with you a statement called Some Thoughts on the Path of Not Knowing. These words came to me in one of those unexpected moments of inspiration when I wasn't thinking about the subject at all. It was in August of 1999, and I was living alone in Oregon, far from my support system. You'll see references to the stream, which is my spiritual community, and so on. There was no actual organization at the time, and when I wrote these words, I was really all alone. Getting divorced. In the forest, too sick and crippled to get in my car and leave the house to get food, as it happens, having no idea how I was going to survive. Here are the words that came to me one evening quite out of the blue. They describe a perspective that allows us all to become not knowing and more inspired. And I'd like to share this with you. And as I share this with you, I'd like you to stay in the space of not knowing, of paradox, of not hanging on to anything, but let these words come through you like the stream of energy. We co-create reality with the universe in a subtle dance of intention and allowance. And that, of course, became the basis of our Platform 3, becoming co-creative. But this is where it came from when I wrote this statement. I'll repeat that. We co-create reality with the universe in a subtle dance of intention and allowance. Our beliefs are free-flowing manifestations of our state of being in the moment. It is what we believe is more of a reflection of our state of being than it is of reality. We know that we don't know. All efforts to pretend otherwise are motivated by fear and lead to frustration and disappointment. In the not knowing, our inner knowing guides us moment by moment, which is all we can know. We know more in silence, sound, and movement than in words. We are committed to self-knowledge so that we can release agendas and reactivity, so we can be empty, so we can not know, so that we can be guided by our knowing. I'm going to reread that. We are committed to self-knowledge so that we can release agendas, like we get to know ourselves so we can release what we think we know. So we can release agendas and reactivity, so we can be empty, so we can not know, so that we can be guided by our knowing. We thrive on paradox. We acknowledge our needs, including those for love and partnership. We acknowledge the pain of our needs unmet. We commit to passionate partnering with ourselves so that we may be whole, even in the face of our unmet needs. Through our wholeness, we can allow ourselves to risk not knowing, which in turn allows us to know and therefore meet our needs moment by moment. The result is partnership with ourselves and others, rather than codependency or domination. Through not knowing, we simultaneously intend and allow, connect and release. In this way, we nurture and respect the wholeness of ourselves and others. We exist at the intersection of the material and spiritual planes. At that intersection, our not knowing opens us to the guidance and wisdom of the universe. Next time I will define what it is to become not knowing for the moment. But in the meantime, I invite you to walk the path of not knowing with me. Because really, there isn't anything else. James, I'd like to ask you to do a brief meditation.
Let's just open ourselves to receiving chi, welcoming chi into our beings, so that we may have an energetic experience, higher energies. Relaxing into the process of living. With each breath, just feel yourself relaxing more and more into a deep pool of peace. Allow yourself to experience a growing sense of well-being. Imagine moving through life with this sense of well-being and openness, wholeness. Open to each moment as to what that moment brings. And knowing that you don't need to know how to respond to that moment until that moment arrives. Thus you can completely be relaxed in this moment, now, as the moments unfold. It will come to you at the time that you need to know what to do, how to respond to the moments to come. Meanwhile, you can simply relax in the process of living, the process of beingness and doingness. Being open. And if you envision that you have particular goals to be achieved on this day or in future days to come, you can be relaxed about them, hold them lightly, simply as indicators of a direction to start toward, with a relaxed feeling about whether or not the universe will help to co-create the fulfillment of that or something else. In the subtle dance of your intention and the universe's allowance of what indeed does come about. The subtle dance of intention and allowance, intention and allowance. And if you have an emotional reaction to anything that arises, think of the image of catching and releasing in fishing. If a feeling of anger or shame comes up, allow yourself to simply catch on to it and then release it, let it go. Catch and release. and restore the equilibrium, whatever is available to you at the time, having released what needed to be let go of. Moving through life as a process, allowing yourself to be an instrument of intuitive guidance as you are navigated through life by higher consciousness, checking in continually. Is it this way? Is it that way? Do I do this? Do I do that? Is it the highest good of all, including myself, to do this? To go there? Moving through life with an inner sense of peace and harmony. Having harmonized your inner being with the beingness of higher consciousness, of wholeness.
Yes.
Yes.